You got anything?
Is that right? No, other than just start up again.
Okay, all right, we'll do that. Welcome, everybody. So a couple of things to start off with here. Are we going to announce the rescheduling?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so for October, November, we're going to move the meetings up a week because of obvious holidays that fall and conflict there. And then December, we're just going to plan on not having a meeting. Okay, so we'll try and send out some reminders as those dates get closer, but just so that you know that that's the case. And then, do you want to mention Startup Weekend?
Yeah, we've just gone out with plans for Startup Weekend, Las Cruces, and that's going to be the weekend of November 15th. And if you guys aren't familiar with it, it's well, a couple people here attended the Albuquerque one, but it's basically 54 hours of developing a business model around a startup idea. And they try and emphasize having something produced by the end of the 54 hours. So whether it's just a website or you're actually developing an app or something like that. And there's about 5 different judges, typically who are entrepreneurs in the community, who will select the top 3. And there's different monetary prizes and discounts for service providers that kind of help your startup get going. And like, for instance, our team has stayed together since our July event, and a lot of others have too. So it's just a good way to find other team members they'd be interested in working with. So we'll send out information on that as we get a little bit closer and have some mentors and judges defined.
All right, so does anybody else have any announcements that they want to voice? Okay, then I'll go ahead and introduce Antonio. Just the cliff notes off the bio that I was studying a few minutes ago. So Antonio's got his bachelor's degree from San Jose, which is in computer science. Came to NMSU how long ago? A while. Yeah. So came to NMSU and got a master's degree in computer science and is currently working on his PhD in computer science as well. So definitely dedicated to the field of computer science. So I'm definitely looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So I picked up some tips, some hints earlier, and I think Antonio is actually using this PhoneGap technology for the product that the startup team, yes, correct? All right, so we'll actually get to see some real world application, or at least we can ask questions that pertain. If we don't see them, we can force it out of him. PhoneGap being a piece of technology that helps you deliver software to device without having to write on the device specific platform. So I'm sure we're going to get much more in-depth knowledge there. So with that, we'll go ahead and give it to Antonio.
Okay. My presentation is going to be a little different. I'm going to actually try to force some group participation, and one for 2 reasons. My Git foo is not very good, and you'll see why I'm using Git in this case. I've started to get better, but it's not where it should be. And this is more of a I wanted to try to make this a little less of a lecture and a little more of interaction, more discussion of what is it that people use to develop quote unquote apps or applications for phones. Apps are eventually going to get to the desktop. If you haven't already seen a Windows 8 machine, you buy things through a Windows phone. So that is the eventuality. So, but a quick show of hands or a shout out. What have people used for application development on like particular platforms? Is there more, like if you're an Android user or developer, raise your hand. you do iOS, Symbian, BlackBerry, Windows, okay. Anyone do multiple of those? I don't remember seeing a hand being raised for that. Yeah?
Sort of,
Okay.
Adobe Air.
Okay. So there's other solutions besides native apps. So disclaimer, you cannot beat the speed performance of native apps. So PhoneGap, any of these other ones may try to sell you near native speed. That is with a huge mountain of salt. So word of warning, you're just not going to beat. It's like compiled code versus interpreted. There's no comparison in speed performance wise. So with that, I have posted this code on GitHub. And it's publicly available. My user is AARREDON, and it should be under the project NMPG-PhoneGap. So I put a yeah. So that's where I've posted the code. And here's where we're at the point where I'm going to need audience participation. Earlier today, I had the brilliant idea of, let me make a few changes and put it to the repo. So when that happened, I forked a lot of stuff. So I need to revert in Git, and does anyone know how to do to a particular version?
You just showed that you just do git checkout and then
with the name? Okay. So
and by name it would be the revision.
okay. So that's what I'm going to do right now, because I want to show people that it actually does this. So
And that does leave you in a detached head state, but there's some way to actually make that.
is this the commit that I would need to?
If that's the one that you want to roll back to.
Yeah. Okay. And it's git checkout and just that.
Yep.
Okay. So a little. Thank you. We're going to get to that. I'm going to do some more PhoneGap talk here. So PhoneGap is before I get to that, who here knows how to develop apps for a web client? That being like HTML5. So there's more hands going up for that than there were for the individual platforms. This is what PhoneGap does. They started out as, I want to pronounce their name as Inovi. I can never get their name right. But they were purchased by Adobe. Adobe bought them out, and they changed the name to PhoneGap. And what they do is they leverage HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and give it a framework inside of each different platform that you can run that code in. So it lets you run web applications on an actual platform. And it will build it for you on each platform. I'll get to that after I've made an attempt to see if I've unmessed up the code. But at that speed, you can deploy to multiple platforms without actually having to have the expertise to know every single one of those platforms. And they have on their actual website, I won't go to it, but at PhoneGap.com, they have a nice little table spreadsheet that shows you all the different things that they support, camera, accelerators, GPS, and various other things, local storage. Some platforms have it, others don't. And it's one of several. With the coming soon of Firefox OS, this is going to be a little more relevant, where Firefox OS is going to be all web apps that are going to be built. There's going to be an app store, but they're all going to be designed to run in this fashion of HTML, JavaScript, CSS, that kind of software stack. That doesn't mean you can't use JavaScript libraries. The sample code here actually has, well, two technically, but one in particular. It uses jQuery, and on top of that, it uses jQuery mobile. So it uses that software stack to do a few other things. But, any questions so far on PhoneGap? So let me get to you do not have to develop on all those platforms. If you have iOS, you can install PhoneGap on your iOS system, develop for it, and then publish to, you can either use a private repo. In this case, I've used a public one so that I can then send it to what's called the build bot or build PhoneGap, and they will build and generate all the different packages for all those different platforms. So we're gonna, as with all live demos, we're gonna do it as best as the demo gods will let me do it. So I'm going to refresh this because Michael was helpful enough to. With my Git repo, I'm going to build this and then run it on my emulator, and we're going to see if this works. And if its failure is more of a combination of mine and Eclipse, and I've just been having issues. I will get this working come hell or high water. Believe me, I'm not going to put broken code on GitHub, and it looks like I'm still having several other issues with it. All this simple little app does is it allows for, and this is a very common error. There's about 15 different ways I've seen online to try to resolve this, and they're not all the same. The problem with this is you're running your JavaScript HTML application on one layer. PhoneGap jams another layer in between to provide you hardware access to the GPS, camera, and all these other different interfaces, because they're all available via JavaScript, and I'll show you what that code looks like. And how you debug something like that becomes a pretty difficult task. On the GitHub repo, I have a link that shows you, that gives you a local development tool that will help you, and that's, some of you might have seen it earlier, I was firing it up. It uses Node.js. There's the link on the GitHub account takes you to that site and shows you, which is on the PhoneGap documentation, tells you how to install it and get things running. But we can try to, I'll demo that here. I just have to make some changes in order to get that to work. But let's say, for instance, everything came up, there was no problem. With my, so here on the Adobe PhoneGap, I don't know if everyone can see that. I can, since this is linked to my GitHub account, I can update the code, and it will do a git pull. This will pull the latest code, and it will queue it for processing and generation of all these different apps. So you can see, well, if you can see, you see a little like loading. Two things though, because iOS and BlackBerry require certificates, you're not going to get those unless you have your certificates uploaded to their site. So it says it's working, but the iOS one fails immediately. The BlackBerry one, for whatever reason, attempts to keep going, but the iOS one fails immediately. I have Linux on this system. I did this via Android. I do not have iOS, Windows, or any of these other platforms, but it has generated all these other builds for me. So via your GitHub account, you have one private repo you can do with your account. You can have as many as you want public accounts. This one I created via a public account. And you can share that via your public link. So people can then, with the QR code, if you have the QR scanning application, you can scan it and install it on your phone. Yes?
Quick question. So if you did have a valid certificate for developing iOS apps, could you create an iOS app from your Linux machine? Am I understanding that right? Or?
Yes,
okay.
Because I have as long as I have a valid certificate and it's at the Adobe and it's attached to my account, then it will do those. You get that little weird kind of, you need that iOS, plugged into iTunes, and there's a few other steps to install like non-App Store, iOS, or iTunes Store applications, because they're not officially released. There's a little weird workaround, but it's still possible. Okay. You don't have to have, I'm trying to remember, I think the restrictions, I did this last year, I had a certificate, well, a little over a year ago. You think you were limited up to 100 different devices you can install it on.
You still are.
What's that?
You still are.
Oh, okay, so
I actually just verified this.
it hasn't changed. So
Uh-huh.
you can share that with up to 100 different iOS devices, and I'm not sure what happens after that. But as you see here, it's built these for me. I can refresh this. It hasn't. The build number has probably changed, but other than this, I haven't really done anything spectacular for it. But this is the bit of nice resources and the little additions that PhoneGap itself offers. There's another one called Appcelerator. It's by a different company. I don't know if they have something like the build PhoneGap, but you can sort of see the power of this and what it lets you leverage.
Yeah.
And that's where the whole, I'm a web developer. I have no idea what I'm in, as a developer. I'm a web developer, that's what I've done. I refuse to learn app development. Somebody help me out. Well, there's multiple ways to leverage your web knowledge to create applications for phone.
So
Yes.
essentially, is the app going to be, basically running inside of like a browser shell or something? It's HTML, it's JavaScript, it's calling into some of the native, camera or whatnot.
Yeah.
Whatever they have access to. Is that essentially what's going on?
Not necessarily. There is and I can load that up. Let me see how. Well, there's no need to read documentation. I can put that in there, but in the PhoneGap documentation, they provide here's what you have available to you. They have an actual web window where you can launch a separate browser window from that. So since that's not easily supported in several of the platforms, there's a lot of quirks for iOS, there's quirks for Android. So the problem is that they have a web window they kind of launch, but you really don't have access to that. If you wanted to create a separate child browser window, you can launch that given any limitation of the platform. And I'm saying limitation, I think there used to be an issue with iOS. I think that's been resolved. There's been a big changeover. Right now I'm using 2.9.0. There's been a big revision number 3.0, and that changes the whole workflow of how this is done. Now this is all done via node modules that you download, and you can generate example files. You no longer have to download a giant, tarball, extract this, and use all these files. They're now doing a lot of this via node. So, and that caused quite a bit of flux because the documentation, they released 3.0, documentation hasn't caught up. I think it's probably there now, but there's one solution for the 2.9 series, or the 2.0 series doesn't solve for 3.0. The way their plugins have changed are completely different. So there was a bit of confusion on the net for a while on that. I think it's still around, but for the most part, a lot of that's been resolved with the documentation. But you do start with your rooted web window, which will draw everything HTML-wise. But if you wanted to spawn a separate one, you have to do that. There's no way to really actually control that one. It's a bit out of your hands.
As in navigating and that sort of thing, that you can control?
Yeah.
Okay.
You navigate via JavaScript. So it's the behavior you do is for all intents and purposes like you would any other web page with JavaScript, HTML, or CSS. And you can store history. There is no actual limitation with your JavaScript stuff. So you're not really restricted for too many things. There's a few really quirky restrictions, but for all intents and purposes, you're not really limited to what you can do with JavaScript. You can write files as long as I mentioned, that's supported in that platform. You can load, and the good thing, or the advantage of this is because you're creating an application, you can load any heavy JavaScript files that you want and distribute it with the application, and there's no need to access the network for that. So if you're going to do something like this, include all of that in your application. Do not reach out and access for that. You can start with like a shell of a website and then go out to the network and then try to pull all the pages, but Apple's caught on to that and they no longer allow that. So they do allow you to submit iOS PhoneGap store applications, but they're very, very particular on what you're doing to pull data. What was very popular was people would create a shell in PhoneGap, distribute it to Windows, all the other applications, and they're just pulling all their pages off the network. So it's just sitting there. That you're not really distributing an app, you're just distributing a front end to your web pages. And they've stopped that a while ago. So if you're hoping to do that, it's not going to work. People have, yeah, they've kind of they've ruined it for all of us. Yeah, shucks. But that's one of the nice things is if you have a heavy JavaScript framework, just include that in there. It's a big. The applications get bigger, right? Because they're non-native. You will have huge size differences. You can get pretty big on your applications, but if you've minimized your network traffic to actual API and things you only actually really need, or any map data, you're pretty much at the same level as a native app in that data transmission. Not performance, I'm not trying to say that, I'm just saying in what you're actually transmitting back and forth across the network. Because you still do have to be wary of that, want to sit there and hammer on someone's data network and burn their cap.
Now, you know who they are, the committee, because the one I really see, they fixed that because viruses could just go out and grab pages, but really the more annoying one is you want to listen to music and they say, well, to listen to music, we need access to your phone record, your contact list, your location. And to me, it's like, that's totally inappropriate, and I don't want any of those apps, because it's like, why do you need to have access to inappropriate information to stream music, or video to my location?
So we'll look here at so I'll use the GitHub because they have nice, I won't torture you with my Vim. So on GitHub they also have nice coloring. This is what you're talking about, the different permissions. Because this is a blank, give me access to everything. You don't want to submit an application like this because you're asking for camera, vibrate, which is the vibrate on the phone. Course location is Wi-Fi location. Find is GPS location. So here you're asking for broad access to everything they have. To prevent users from turning away from your app, you only want to include what is absolutely necessary. In the PhoneGap documentation, they say if you need to access, write a file or some kind of local storage, you would have to enable this write external storage. And there may be other little caveats that you may have to include. So there's access network state or something. Sometimes the permissions make sense. I think there's 2 cases where you need 2 additional permissions to get. I think it's like the count.
What you're advocating is get all the permissions regardless if used or not.
Well, no, I'm advocating the opposite. This is the default. If I were to in Node generate the templates for the application in Android, it gives me this by default.
So remove whatever you want.
Yes.
Or comment it out.
Yeah, comment it out or remove, but this is all demo stuff, right? Like, you could submit it, but it's going to get kicked out. All this application does is take a picture and store it in your album. And
so it does require a platform-specific manifest file or something along those lines?
the platform-specific manifests, yes. And let's see. Let me just go via the site. I want to make sure. Ooh, Aggie, whatever, cut me off. So let me get to the documentation, and so here's where, so be careful with this. When you go to the documentation, it immediately takes you to the current version. And even their documentation's a little sketchy. Now I'll show you what I mean by that. Here is all their revision number. I'm using 290, so I'm gonna switch to that documentation. And their platform guides here give you specific instructions on the various platforms you're developing. This is for your development environment, not for what you're publishing to. This is just to get your settings working. And I think the overview used to give, yeah. So here's what I was talking about earlier. I don't know if everyone can see that. It's the table I mentioned of the various types of hardware you can use from the various platforms. Let's say, since we use the camera in this application, we wanted to, and it looks accessible to all platforms. Let's just look at the specifics of that. So for my config, what is that?
Right.
Okay, is that better? So here for Android, I have two particular settings to set. For BlackBerry, I need to make these changes. And it goes on for all the different platforms. This is what's necessary in order to enable camera access via the JavaScript. And if I continue to scroll, it gives me the descriptions of the various functions I need. But let me get to the cool part where they give you a full kind of working example. They're all, here's your JavaScript, and this is what you need. There are other examples well, here's their quote unquote, their full example. This is an example of what's necessary, but here is I can just copy and paste this entire HTML file, JavaScript included, and test it. I have to do nothing. So this is, I think, is minimum barrier as on the phone as well, on both. The simulator works a little weird. With the Android one, if you have the right API level, you have to enable your webcam or something to use the camera. I don't know how the GPS works on the simulator in Android. I've never tried that. But I've done it all on the phone, and it all works fine. Any questions? Is yes, because if you already have your web knowledge, if you're just wanting to, if you just started out with JavaScript and you really haven't done much CSS or HTML, you're gonna have a bad time because you're trying to develop on. You may not be sure. You may not be 100% sure where the failure is happening, whether it's in your code, whether it's in the emulator itself. If you're having to fight your development environment, it becomes a bit difficult. But with these full examples here, I would say that's probably as easy as it gets. Once your environment's set up, copy paste this, and it's gonna work. I don't think it gets any easier than someone doing it for you at that point. But your mileage will vary, right? If you're having a hard time trying to get your tools working, you may struggle more with that versus, and then this will just be a drop in and everything works. Or maybe you didn't completely copy everything and there's something in the JavaScript that didn't translate over right and it's giving you weird errors. It could be any number of things, but it's intended to be as easy as possible for people who've done web development to do phone development. And plus, you don't have to learn all the native platforms. You leverage your web development knowledge to build applications for a big majority of these platforms. And I know I had set up this here. This is a web inspector remote. So this is also in the links on my GitHub page. it shows you how to enable debugging on a device like your phone, tablet, via the network. So it does this remotely. And I'll point you to where. Let's go back to GitHub. And this is all via HTML. This line here. GitHub is good. It'll scale. Is how I need the IP address of my development environment or some kind of desktop, laptop, something with, it won't work on another tablet. I've tried other weird little extensions, but I can enable this debugger, which is running Node. So on this machine, running this software, I will capture console output that normally gets via output the browser. So if anyone's ever done any JavaScript on Chrome or Firefox, and the console.log is the C equivalent of printf. Anyone's, yeah? Okay. That will, so just in case no one's seen the console, this is the console here. So if I did console.log, it would show up in this console. Because you are doing a web application on a phone and don't have actual access to that, this interface here captures your console logs and your, anything you can do here is captured by this. And what I mean by anything is all of this here is also displayed on your phone. So it's a two-way communication. This makes the debugging of the PhoneGap applications insanely easy. It makes it a lot less painful. So there's no need to make a change, recompile, run. If you're sort of not too sure on your JavaScript and you're having to sit there and make a small change, send it to the emulator, send it to your phone, your hardware. This little debugger, this injected debugger here makes it a lot easier, because what you were used to using on your web browser, you can now do via also the web browser, but it's remote from the device. And it's a huge help.
And that's just Chrome developer tools right there?
No, this is on Node. Yeah, I fired it up here. So it starts the server on my machine here, and on my PhoneGap application, I provided the IP address and port of my machine that's running the Weimer. I don't know how to pronounce it without being vulgar, yeah, or mispronouncing it. And it will let me, all the behavior I'm doing here is echoed on the application here, on the device.
You can set breakpoints as well?
Yes, it gives you back the power you lost in your extensions, that you're like, well, how am I going to do this? I'm used to using the developer tools in Chrome or Firefox. This is now routes it back out to another web interface, but that you can also send. So if you wanted to check some kind of JavaScript, if it's storing this object or printing this, or yeah, it's all there. You basically lose nothing from that.
It's pretty remarkable. Even like mousing over
Will
would
do it.
highlight the thing on your phone?
Yes,
Wow.
and I'm completely mortified that Eclipse decided, and I thought it was clever to try to make a few more changes before today. So I deeply apologize, because that would be fantastic, and not just take my word for it, but it is a very nice tool.
Who's using it?
Uh,
Commercial?
PhoneGap, there's a lot of different, on their website, they have their little,
I mean, we have applications, not toy applications.
no, it depends on what you mean. So real applications in the sense that they provide just about as much access to hardware as you can do natively. You're not going to be computing pi to the 1000th digit, so I'm not sure. I haven't seen a limitation that would prevent a PhoneGap application versus a native. If you have the resources to create native applications, then that's the best way to go. If it's a small team of like, I would say even under 10 people, PhoneGap's probably still your best bet, because unless you have somebody who's an expert in every single native platform and they have time to dedicate only to that, you're going to have a hard time beating them with not just PhoneGap, but any of these other web platforms. Also, as I mentioned, Firefox OS is going to this style of applications. They're not going to have native applications on their phone. Although we in other first world countries may not see the Firefox OS phone, they're definitely targeting lower socioeconomic people to make it as durable. Yes, I wanted to avoid saying cheap, but yeah. But you know, that's going to be a huge wide deployment, and well, that's the hope.
I see browser Quest on here, so I'm pretty impressed by that.
What's that?
I see browser Quest on the apps created with PhoneGap, so I'm pretty impressed with that. It's a pretty fun game.
And I'll bet probably 50% or 25% at least of all the apps that you buy for your phone are done this way. Because if you think about it, if you're a corporation with your 10,000 employees, you don't want to go, well, shoot, okay, we have 6 platforms, let's go hire 6 people that only know how to do those. They're just going to say, well, hey, Adobe gives us this PhoneGap, let's just, we have your guys, let's just do it, right? So this isn't maybe even for small companies, this is for the big guys that don't want to hire 6 new people for 6 new platforms.
Yeah, and
Unfortunately,
it can be a way of saving money. If you don't want to dedicate the resources of having an iOS guru, Android guru, you know, all these people who specialize in app and the different platforms, PhoneGap lets you get to it insanely fast.
It's also a good strategic option for getting on all platforms, and then, you know, if you need to go native, well, at least you've got it out there, and you know, instead of going native to begin with,
Yeah.
and limiting yourself to one market, or
The nice thing with this too is, since more people have probably been web developers, you can prototype something insanely fast on this, and then if you need to justify moving towards native applications, you have, like, we have this working, we're looking for that bit more performance, or, you know, very either stylized indications, you can, it's faster to market, but you can also justify it at a larger company, or, you know, if you have to answer to a boss, that we've got this now, we want to push this further than we can with PhoneGap, because, like as I mentioned, there are limitations for it. You can justify that cost already having a user base and people kind of expecting and anticipating the next version. You know, what are you guys going to add to it? How are you going to make it, you know, either a little quicker, add other graphics? So this doesn't do any hardware rendering that you would get on a native app. So the games are a bit limited, but I'm not sure what's in store for PhoneGap, whether they'll leverage the HTML5 like Canvas and then try to put some kind of layer to the actual hardware. I have no idea what they're, but I'm assuming that that's a direction they would try to take, to try to tie in the really nice benefits of HTML5 into some kind of hardware rendering, but I have no clue.
so are there any costs involved with it?
With this, no. It's free download and use. It's Apache license. So this is technically Apache Cordova is what it's called. It is PhoneGap, but it's licensed under Apache. So it's, you're free to create applications, sell them, make money. There's no, you know, it's sort of BSD license. Kind of along that, all the weird licensing things. There's no need to re-release the source code to anybody. So you're.
Is there competition for PhoneGap?
Well, there's the Appcelerator is another one. I think it's the company's Titanium, or Yes, there. So they have, they do along the similar lines. I think their device coverage is a bit narrower, but they have, their solution seems more tightly integrated to the native platform. There's been several, we've developed for this, we've developed for Accelerator, but we don't really see the difference that they're planning on their site. The advantage of PhoneGap is that because it covers more platforms than Accelerator.
Do you have any ideas, the business value, why the investment from Adobe to keep it up? Do you know what I mean?
I can speculate. I would say the fear of Flash being used for something it was never intended, the fact that the web as a kind of awkward, weird creature itself tends to create a lot of little weird languages, things that run on it, but when it comes down to what's the easiest to deploy, it's almost like a lowest common denominator, but not in a negative sense of, if you're going to create, say the next sort of Web 3.0, or let's say Web 2.0 kind of Gmail client, what sort of Gmail sort of started to do, you're still leveraging a lot of the more widespread HTML, custom JavaScript at the time, but now it's JavaScript that people have either reverse engineered things like that, but you can only do so much with the browsers on the client side. And when the advent of Ajax and things like that, it's continued to go in that direction. I think Adobe realizing that they don't want to necessarily get left out on that, and it may, well, not inadvertently, but it may benefit them as well on their platforms, on their applications. I'm not sure how much of the Adobe Air stuff or even the Adobe Online stuff they've pulled from PhoneGap. It could be they've taken that framework and that's where that kind of launched.
Well, Air predates PhoneGap.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Air was 2008 and PhoneGap, they bought it in 2011.
Oh, okay.
That was Wikipedia.
Oh, okay.
You're looking for efficiency.
Yeah, there's, but Air, I mean, it is not, you still need to install a client to use it. And
That's the big one.
And PhoneGap is not, if you have a browser, you're off and running. Yeah. So, yeah, apologize for that. Yeah, I don't know, they could have solved their solution. I was like, ooh, we like how they did it, and we'll take what they have and keep them going on it, maybe they'll make it better for us.
So you cannot show us what you have done?
I cannot because I broke my source tree. I've tried to do it, and like I said, I sincerely apologize for that. I should know better than to make changes on demo day.
I did
Yeah.
kind of like that with my circuit sim. It's very embarrassing.
You work for Microsoft, that's all. No.
You can't roll back to it even earlier?
I've tried. That's what when we were doing the revert.
Did it update your machine here, or was it just the website? Did you need to re-download it?
No, it's so my camera app is actually linked into is in this GitHub here. So if I reverted there, it should have. If it changed the files back, then there would be or there should be no issue. It would work. Yeah, this is unfortunate.
One question I have all the time is for people who develop mobile apps.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that to myself, what can I do that is not already there? Whatever I think of, it's already there. So far.
As a mobile app or?
Yeah. You know?
Well, that's,
You know,
that's
I
more-
worked, a couple of years ago, my boss, I worked at the community college, and Margie worked at a brand new iPhone, and he asked me, hey, Omar, I want you to develop an app. Sure, what about? I don't know, whatever. Just want to use, I want to have an app. The community college must have an app.
Mhm.
You know, we know here, but so I think, okay, what can I do to impress my boss?
right, so, it depends. I think
I guess
creating
more
an
like a
app for
philosophical
the,
question, I guess, to creative people.
it is, in
Probably
the sense
married.
of, you gotta start with the problem you wanna solve. So if you're just gonna create an app to create an app, then you'll get lost in the noise with everybody else creating apps. If your app is going to, it doesn't have to be, you know, solve world hunger problem, but if it solves like, oh, this is a little annoying thing that happens to me, I'm a developer, I created an app for it to solve that, how, you know, and then I'm gonna release it to other people, either charge them or not charge them. You start to either earn, this person is a good app developer, they've created something useful, and not like, oh, here's another, you know, program 275 of playing this quote-unquote Tetris game, or something else. If you're just redoing something that someone has already done, then it may not get noticed. But if it provides even the slightest removal of annoyance or increases a convenience to something, you will get noticed very, very quickly.
That doesn't explain the exploit of so many games. You know,
Well,
most
because-
of the applications are games, like,
Yeah.
like you're solving a problem, like.
Right, but games are
The problem
games-
is boredom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
The problem that games solve is I need something to fill my time with. Here is a, you know, just
Let's speed
avalanche
up
of
the
games.
cashier's lines, Walmart.
Yeah.
Or,
It-
yeah.
Can I give you
Can
an
I do it?
example of what he's talking about? I thought, that one, you know, the old Star Trek game, the old text version from the
Like
1980s?
old mud games and things
Yeah,
like
where,
that.
you know, you do the, you know, short range scan or whatever, and it just scans on the screen. I thought, oh, shit, I'll do that as my first app. Nobody will have written that. And I went and searched, and there's a guy that's already written the app so you can play the old Star Trek game on your phone. So it's like, even a text-based game, you know, from 1980s has been written as an app already. So it's kind of like you said, sometimes it's
Space
hard to
invaders, huh?
come up with a new app that hasn't been done already, you know, it's kind of interesting.
So
This
since
is Star Trek we're talking about, so it's not exactly a niche market. You know.
Well, there's only one of them at least, and not 279, but it still was interesting, it's already been written.
So does that mean that it works then?
this is the example, and I just wanted to illustrate that I'm not a windbag and that this does work. But I'm going to show the emulate, I'm going to plug in for the winery. So the W word, yeah, I'm just so careful, I don't want to mispronounce it. So
Should I say wiener? Should
apologies for
I
that.
say wiener? You can say wiener, you're an adult.
There was a congressman named Congressman.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's done a few bad things, but you can say his name.
So
No,
what
as
I'm gonna
engineers, we
do-
can always make fun like that. That's probably, you know,
So
not a
put
bad
schnitzel
way
on
to
the end of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's covered.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
With the E and the R section.
So let me change this, and then I can show it.
You know, for an app idea, we could create an app that shows you how to pronounce winery, or how to pronounce it.
That actually would be useful, how to properly pronounce words.
Is it an acronym or something?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's,
Just search for
I
phonics.
think it was Web Inspector Remote.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait, okay. Well, hold up at that.
Wow, you're good.
so this is going to connect, so here's where I mentioned, let me fire this up. So that way, I'll have to bring it over. Is it going? Okay. Let me refresh. refresh that. So there's,
Aside, what was the repository on GitHub again?
it's AAREDON, and then it's no, NMPG PhoneGap.
Thank you.
So here it is working, so you see this lights up. Let me go to, there's nothing to really select. Did it show up? It should, maybe the div. Yeah, see, do you guys see that? So this would work the same way as in our remote device. So that's why I'm saying that this gives you back the power of your web browser, right-click development tools on a remote device. This is the emulator, but it's no different than, well, it brings you back to the same familiar environment you're used to, where right-click, why is my JavaScript doing that? Oh, I missed this, change, or I can ask, my JavaScript if I have jQuery or something, I can start asking things to it via the console, and it will respond.
Changing CSS.
Exactly. I can go into either my elements, see what resources I have. This tool makes it a lot easier to do PhoneGap development. I don't think it's limited to PhoneGap, because because in your application you're actually directing it to this IP address. So I think it will work with Accelerator, but I've not tried that. I could be wrong, but